Well, I'm back again for another installment of Building on the Rock. Building on the Rock, a collection of Christian stories for children. And it's evening time here on the hill. I'm in my study, as you can tell from the backdrop of my books. I have two short ones for you tonight. The first was called, or is called, Believing and Trusting. There was a severe drought some years ago in the northern part of England. The situation became so severe that if it would not rain within a week, the crops would be totally lost. Due to this urgent need, it was decided to have a special prayer service for rain in one of the local churches. As the minister of this congregation was approaching his church, he saw a little girl walking ahead of him, carrying an umbrella. He caught up with the girl and asked, "My little girl, why are you carrying an umbrella to church on such a hot day?" Turning and looking into his face, the girl answered, "We're going to ask God to send rain today. I want to be ready." The minister testified in his sermon that the faith of this girl put him to shame. Well, we're told in the scriptures that we're to pray believing, but I suspect a lot of times we just say words, and we say them because it's the right thing to say. Christians are supposed to say those words, but we don't believe them. Well, this little girl did. And, as the minister testifies, he was rightly put to shame, and I suspect he repented before he got to the church house that day. Believing and trusting, asking the Lord and believing he hears his people. Here's the next one for the day, a special gift. Mrs. Knight sighed. "I'm sorry, but we have nothing to eat. You'll have to go to bed without supper." "Are you sure, Mom? Don't we have anything?" whined Millie, the youngest child. "We have nothing, darling. Let me tuck you in. Come on, Emma. Alex, let's go upstairs." After the children had been tucked into bed, Mrs. Knight sat in the kitchen and read from her Bible. She was a widow who feared the Lord in truth. Providing food for her family was not easy, but she had experienced time and again that the Lord is a father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows. Kneeling at her chair, Mrs. Knight poured out her troubled heart before her gracious God. She did not complain about the way in which the Lord was leading her. She received grace to submit to God's will. She asked if the Lord would let her children sleep without suffering hunger, and the Lord heard her prayer. They all slept soundly. But in the morning, the children felt their empty stomachs once more. It was almost time for school. How could Mrs. Knight send her children to school hungry? She didn't know what to do. "O Lord," she sighed, "help us again in thy mercy. Thou seest and knowest our need." "Mother, isn't there any bread yet?" asked Alex. "Not yet, son. And we have no money either. I don't know how, but the Lord will help us. With the Lord, there is deliverance, the Bible says." The children were silent. Although they were very hungry, they did not complain. "Come, children, let's kneel here, and together we will tell the Lord all of our needs. We will tell him that you have to go to school and that we have no food. He knows that, but he wants us to ask him for these things." Then the mother poured out her heart again in prayer. By faith, she was able to plead upon the Lord's promise that he would care for his people. Mrs. Knight was so deeply involved in her prayer that she didn't notice what was going on around her. Emma, however, heard a scratching noise at the back door. Finally, she quietly got up and tiptoed out of the room. She opened the door carefully and gasped in surprise. There stood a dog at the back door with a basket in its mouth. And in the basket, there were 3 loaves of bread. The dog dropped the basket on the mat at the door as though it had strict orders to do just that. Hearing the commotion, the others came running. What went on in the heart of the widow is impossible to describe. She knew it was the hand of her Lord. True praises to God soon sounded throughout the little house. The Lord used ravens to send food to the prophet Elijah. You remember that? I'll let you look it up in the Bible. I'll tell you this much, it's in the Old Testament. In this story, we used a dog, or rather, in this story, God, used a dog to bring bread to the praying widow and her 3 children. Surely the God of Elijah lives. Happy is he that hath the God of Jacob for his help, whose help is in the Lord his God. Psalm 146, verse 5. Now you may be sitting there thinking, wow, someone had a really obedient dog, and they put that basket there full of bread and said, go right over there to that house. And they hid in the bushes. And that may be what happened. We don't know. They didn't know. But it might be something else. We used to have a dog. His name was Buck. Some of you know Buck. You've been to our house and you've met him. He now lives with a very nice lady out on the west end of town, where he can pretty much have his run of the place without getting in trouble. Well, Buck used to bring us all kind of gifts. He'd bring us a spare shoe now and then. He'd bring us cans that were partially full of raviolis. And I guess he ate some and brought the rest to us. He brought one day a loaf of bread. One day it was a roasted chicken. You know, those you buy at the store, Kroger's, Ingles, Publix, wherever. And apparently somebody had set it out on their deck to go out and eat supper maybe, and Buck smelled it first and grabbed it and brought it to us. I suspect somebody had packed the basket with 3 loaves of bread and set it out, getting ready to go somewhere. And that dog ran by, smelled it, and took it and went to that house. Who knows? We know this, God provided, because he's the ultimate. He's the one behind everything that happens. We're to give him thanks for all good gifts, for they all come from the Father of light. Don't forget that. God bless.